It's been a long week where I didn't get a lot of sleep and things were thrown off, and I had a late upload, but I still got the video uploaded. So I'm still counting it on my consecutive days list. But I was in the shower and I was thinking about last words. Not in a morbid way, though with last words, probably there's not a non morbid way to think about it. Still, I was just thinking about last words. Emily Dickinson's last words have always struck me as at least absolutely insane, if not perhaps profound, and ultimately incredibly haunting. And so I wanted to compile a list of some of the last words for famous authors. I think I have 12 here, 12 or so, and they go as such. I must go in. The fog is rising. This was Emily Dickinson at the age of 55. Her last words, I must go in. The fog is rising. If that doesn't sound like an Emily Dickinson poem, guys, I don't know what does. That is the most Emily Dickinson phrase I could think of, and they were saved for her last words. Do you think you will say something so definitionally you as this for your last words? I don't think I have it in me. I don't think I have the self awareness to say something this me as my last words. I don't think I have the self awareness to say something this me on a regular basis, let alone as my last words. That presence of mind. Emily Dickinson's death was, you see there, 55. Premature. She was suffering with some health ailments that are still a little bit debated. They think, well, it was kidneys, well, it was her heart, all sorts of things. But you can see, I don't want to say a deterioration, but I don't know that there is any other way to really characterize it. When you're reading her poetry towards the end of her life, the separation of those later poems from the wonderful run in, say, the 25 to 50% of the way through her collected works. Just incredible. Um, but those last works are a whole lot shorter. They feel, and I'm not going to look into this particularly hard because I don't really like the whole idea of biographical criticism very much, but they feel almost as a mind that is seeing the glimmer that once that mind saw, that once she saw these glimmers and then she was able to sort of smear that glimmer out on a page. Her later work feels a whole lot like she was just trying to capture the glimmer. So that is what it is. I must go in, the fog is rising. And then we get to quite possibly the most famous last words of an author ever. Lord help my poor soul, Edgar Allan Poe, at the age of 40. Um, you know, one of these things with Edgar Allan Poe, of course, it was going to be something creepy. These last words are every bit as emblematic of Edgar Allan Poe as the last words of Emily Dickinson are of Emily Dickinson. Lord help my poor soul, um, the kind of maybe creepiest, I guess I have to go back to, thing about this phrase is just that, well, guys, it's a separation of Edgar Allan Poe from his soul. Lord help my poor soul. Not Lord help me. Lord help my poor soul. What happens to Edgar Allan Poe after his death seems to be, in Edgar Allan Poe's mind, a little bit separate from what happens to his soul. Where is his soul going? Where is Edgar Allan Poe going? I think that there is a whole lot of consternation, perhaps, about the separation between the soul and the self if you get into particularly religious types of thought. I don't know that I had ever really conceptualized Edgar Allan Poe in that particularly religious way, but to see Edgar Allan Poe's very last words being, the dichotomy between the self and the soul, and Lord help my soul, right? Very, very creepy. Then we have Ernest Hemingway's last words here. Good night, my kitten. So, if you don't know, part of the reason that these words are so particularly haunting, Ernest Hemingway was telling his wife good night, and he would take his own life that night. Good night, my kitten, were his last words to anyone else. We don't know what he said while he was alone. Uh, and then he, sometime during that night, took his own life. We know that his wife at the time was awoken by the shot. So this would have been his last words to anyone else sometime before he took his own life, because she would have had the time between good night, my kitten, and falling asleep to then be woken up. So the sentiment behind those words, especially, we don't know that Hemingway knew what he was going to do at the moment that he said these words to his wife, but someone like Hemingway who struggled with these ideas quite often, and there is reason to believe after, or recently, I guess, in light of all of these CTE types of studies that we've done. So Hemingway got in, I believe, 2 plane crashes during his life. In one of these plane crashes, he was in Africa. I think they were both in Africa, actually. But in one of them, he was trapped with his wife and the pilot in the plane, couldn't get the door open, ended up busting through the door with his head. So, had a history of boxing, had a history in the armed services. We don't know exactly how much combat he did or did not see. He was injured on the front lines, but even that is sort of, the extent of his injuries is debated a lot. So we don't know the real shape that his brain was in, but there's reason to believe that he had some, brain trauma, struggled with these ideas of, self-deletion quite often. And for him to have said this and then gone and done that, where was he? Where was he with those thoughts? It's always something that I've wanted to know. I am going to that country which I have all my life wished to see. This was William Blake at the age of 69. William Blake, a particularly intense poet, would probably be the best way to say it. The culture that has crept up around William Blake, often being quoted by particularly nefarious characters in literature, is something interesting to see. If you remember Red Dragon, the Thomas Harris novel and then movie based on the Thomas Harris novel, he was quoting William Blake and had illustrations of William Blake tattooed on his body. Particularly bad guy. So the idea that I am going to that country which I have all my life wished to see, I think can have a different sort of what you can read it a different way. I think that anyone who reads William Blake fairly often knows that he's talking about heaven. But if you just know William Blake from the sort of way that he is conceptualized in popular, in the popular dynamics, then I don't know that you think he's talking about heaven. You think perhaps he's talking about the other place. Now, William Faulkner here. I'm tired. These are reported several places to be his last words. I could not find any definitive proof that these were his last words. This would be a particularly telling quote because it was the quote from from Addie Bundren in As I Lay Dying. Those were her last words. I'm Todd. And then she died. So was William Faulkner able to, or purposefully channeling Addie Bundren at his death at 64 years old? Was this something that is there's sort of a mythos that rises around authors and writers and artists in general, and I think particularly writers, the idea of their last words is something that can be amplifying to that mythos or destructive to that mythos. But were there no real good final words for William Faulkner? I think it is likely someone would have put some in there, right? Strangely, Shakespeare, at least as far as I can tell, has no reported last words. There's nothing sort of generally accepted to be Shakespeare's last quote. That would be interesting, but as far as I can tell, we do not have it. Uh, Speaking of do not have it, the final quote from James Joyce at the age of 58: "Does nobody understand?" No, James, you should have put it more clearly. As someone who has read plenty of James Joyce, you should have worded it better. Mr. Joyce, I'm sure that there is profundity in it, but I have to go digging to make it. Does nobody understand? No, you should have taken some notes from your buddy Hemingway. Does nobody understand? I'm afraid not. And now, one of my favorite, now, Voltaire is here. Is he a philosopher? Is he a writer? I think the answer to both is yes. So, uh, Voltaire's last words: "Now, now, my good man, this is no time for making enemies." Why are those good last words? Voltaire was being pled with by a member of the church to give up his satanic ways. So you're on your deathbed. Someone from the church comes and says, "Renounce Satan, renounce the devil, renounce Satan." And you reply with, "Now, now, my good man, this is no time for making enemies." That is an absolutely, that's going out with an absolute banger of a quote. Now, Voltaire here, 83 years old, the first time we get to a relatively long life on this list, and that is with the dichotomy that perhaps he's not a writer, perhaps he's a philosopher. There is something particularly caustic about being a writer. There are only a few examples on this list of older individuals. The final quote from Dylan Thomas: "I've had 18 straight whiskeys. I think that's the record." Well, if ever there were a final quote to be had, Dylan Thomas at 39 years old, that is probably one of them. The same level as "Look, Ma, no hands." If that is your last quote, it's something akin to "I've had 18 straight whiskeys. I think that's the record." Going out at 39 years old, that's one way to do it. If you want to exit stage right very, very early, 18 straight whiskeys, setting records with your drinking might be the way. Then we have one that is appropriately ironic, but very sad. Mark Twain, at 74 years old, his last words were, "Goodbye. If we meet, goodbye. If we meet." He was apparently talking to his daughter and died mid-sentence. No one knows what the end of that sentence was going to be. If we meet in the next life, if we meet later, if blah, 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 blah. Who knows what the end of that sentence was? This is very, very sad. I haven't had champagne for a long time. Anton Chekhov at the age of 44. Is there room in life for celebration? Is there room in life for having fun? Is there room in life for joy? If Anton Chekhov can't figure it out, I don't know what hope we have. I want nothing but death. Jane Austen, at 41 years old, with the most metal words on this list. I want nothing but death. Apparently, I believe it was her sister, was asking her, "Do you need anything?" And she said, "I want nothing but death. Bring me death." I didn't know Jane Austen died at 41. That was the most surprising thing to me on this list. The second most surprising thing was that Jane Austen, who I've read a lot of in my life, I had to get my degree, has the most metal last words of all writers. I would not have guessed that. I would not have figured that was the case. Purported last words from Kurt Vonnegut: "I'm out of here." These were relayed by his son posthumously. His son had the same sense of humor, has the same sense of humor, at least as far as I understand, as Kurt Vonnegut at 84 years old. So whether or not that is an actual final quote, or whether or not this was something that they had figured out between the two of them before he died, I'm not quite sure. I don't know if I buy it. And then at 50, everyone has the face he deserves. Those are the last words, I believe written words, of George Orwell at 46. So, a lot of these writers dying between 40 and 70. Just a couple: Mark Twain, Voltaire, Kurt Vonnegut, making it out of the 70s. So, moving on to the Friday Reads portion of this Friday Reads video. What have I been reading? Shirley Jackson, Let Me Tell You. That is the short story compilation that we've been going through here on the channel. And man, is it a good one. All of these short stories so far. So the two that I read this week, which are the final two for the month, very difficult, very coded, very difficult to sort of extract something from. I think I've got the notes taken to be able to extract something from it. The short story that has already appeared on the channel, It Isn't the Money I Mind. Guys, that was a great one. I am so jealous of that short story. And the sort of enjoyability of Shirley Jackson, Let Me Tell You, is something that is off the charts for me. And the first time I read through, so I haven't ever made it through all of it, but I've made it through quite a few of the stories. I was not prepared for that. I had read, before I started this collection, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, The Haunting of Hill House, and what's the short story that she's famous for? The Lottery. I had read those and enjoyed all of them, but I was not ready for the humor in Let Me Tell You. I was not ready for the quirkiness of Let Me Tell You. I was not ready for the fact that it is George Saunders before George Saunders. And really, I think in a lot of ways, the argument could be made, puts George Saunders to shame. Ernest Hemingway, the Ernest Hemingway we've been reading on the channel. A couple of short stories lately that are not necessarily the most well-known of the short stories. I actually already have a comment on one of them from someone who's, I don't think I've ever had a comment from this person on the channel before. It seems perhaps she was finding my channel through this short story, saying, I searched this up and there was nothing else about this short story. And this is a video that I posted within the last few weeks. And to already be getting those types of comments on these videos lets you know that even though Hemingway hasn't published a new short story in quite some time, there's still, for a lot of them, big green acres. It's blue water, right? There is nothing done on some of these short stories. Some of them, like the one that I'm getting ready to read, A Clean, Well-Lighted Place, about which I think I have a unique thought, or at least a thought that I have not seen expressed elsewhere about that short story, a question more than anything about that short story. There's a whole lot of work done on some of them, but some of those short stories, there's not a whole lot of work done. You are, if you're talking about it, one of the first, and this is something I've run into a lot with Emily Dickinson. Then we have the chrysanthemums, the video that posted last night / this morning. I was late on it, but I do work overnight, so I'm giving myself the pass. One of the greatest short stories I've ever read. That video, I think, is 40-ish minutes, and I was zooming through it to try to get it done because it took me so long to do. But that short story is a masterpiece, whether you're reading it as a reader or you're reading it as a writer. There is I have one criticism, one place in that entire short story where I think there could have been a paragraph break and it would have added some impact to the story. But outside of that, guys, it's so good, it's so clean, it's so subtle, and it works backwards, right? So there's callbacks in that text that you only really get to fully enjoy the text after you've put in the work to read it more than once. Frankenstein, we are slowly making our way through this novel. I will finish novels again on this channel at some point. I know that it has been quite some time. There has not been a book review on the channel for a matter of years now. And I am still conceptualizing how to get that done. I have some plans. Um, but really, once I stop doing the daily upload thing at the end of April, I'll be able to put more work into individual videos and get those things rolling again. And then one thing that I don't know if I've ever read it before after I got through and made the video, Casey at the Bat by Ernest Lawrence Thayer. It was an interesting experience. We made a poetry discussion video on that poem, something I'm very proud of now. Let me get real quick here if I can find something on my YouTube. 644 videos in the poetry discussion playlist. We will pass 650. We'll get to 670, or we'll get to 700 at some point this year. So long as National Poetry Month goes smoothly. We have a few more poetry discussions. We'll probably get to 650 this month, if memory serves me correctly. Then we have 30 next month, so that's 680. And then we would just have 20 more for the rest of the year. Even if I just did Monday uploads for the poems, we would get to 700 this year. So that's something I'm proud of. And now we have questions. If you have some questions for me, leave them in the comments section below, because Misa has been nice enough to provide lots of questions, but the well is running dry unless Misa has more questions for the future. Misa asks, do you like to watch movie/TV series adaptations of the books you read when they have one, and if it's possible to find it? I really like doing that, even though 99% of the time the movie TV adaptation really just disappoints me. So I don't watch TV. I have not had a TV for 20 years almost. I'm an old man who is completely out of touch with culture. So take of that, make of that what you will. But the movies, there's a couple of movies that I think, while they do not, in my opinion, do better than the book, they do the things that a movie does better than the book does, and the book does the things that a book does better than the book, or better than the movie does. Those two examples are, of course, Fight Club and American Psycho. Both of the films, absolute classics. Fight Club was 99. Was American Psycho 99, or was it 2000? I believe they are both products of the 90s, but they are movies that do better than the books movie stuff, right? Which makes sense, but it's still difficult to capitalize on. And the books do things that books do better than the movies do, which is obvious, but it's still something you have to capitalize on. An interesting sort of comparison to that would be the Stephen King movies. Stephen King writes particularly cinematic books. He writes these books. All of the big moments from Stephen King movies that you know happen in the books almost exactly the same way. The thing with Fight Club and American Psycho is that a lot of the big scenes from the movies don't really happen in that way in the book itself. So the reason that the book works is because the book puts you in the head of the character, makes you whatever the protagonist, whoever the protagonist is, versus the movie, which puts you in the place, not necessarily in the head. So those are the two real exceptions that I have for movies that are maybe not better than the book, but on some levels, yeah. Number 2 here from Misa. Regarding writing and your being a writer, do you like to write more poetry, short stories, or novels? Do you write all those sorts of things just some of the time, or one in particular? If you write all kinds of stuff, which one do you think is your strongest, and what would you like to publish first? When you get published, a novel, a poetry collection, or a short story collection? Short stories are where I kind of live. Poems are at this point sporadic for me, and novels are always a grind for me. So I don't think that I am a novelist, and that's the only one that makes money. And there's not a whole lot of money there either. There's the famous story of Stephen King when Carrie was published and they wanted to run it as a paperback. They called him up and told him the number, and his agent on the other line thought that he had fainted because he was so quiet for so long. Um, what do I want to get published? So this is a very I've got some stuff published. I've had some stuff out there for a long time now. I don't know that I really believe in the quote unquote scene as it is. So I have really pulled back from submissions. I've really pulled back from attempting to get out there. There is there is a piece of this puzzle I have to put together, and I have to do some deliberation on what it is. But when I get that figured out, maybe I will try to make a reentry to the quote unquote scene. The short stories are easy for me because I do feel that I can find them, if that makes any sense. I can sit down and just start writing words, and eventually some type of conformity to those words, some type of overarching idea or theme will present itself. And sometimes, even on a first draft, I'm able to get a symbol or two in the short story. The poems, for me, are a matter of finding either a phrase or an irony and working backwards from there. And that's how the poetry comes to me. I'm not very good at redrafting poetry. I have to work on that because I don't think that I am able to really make it sing the way that it should. And then novels, again, just a slog for me. So I'm not very good at them. I have to get better at them if I do ever want to make an actual impact as a writer. But I do have a few of them, and I'm working on one more now. But that is what it is. We will see where it goes. I am approaching the age when a writer has already expired, as we saw earlier with those last words. So if I was a writer, I guess I should have had it done by now. That is all I have for this video. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting a like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. There's, if you find yourself here by chance but not design, there's poetry on the channel every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.